After I was drugged, I pushed Dylan onto the bed, and he was surprisingly passionate. I thought my throwing myself at him had finally melted a tiny piece of that iceberg. But when I woke up the next day, he was back to his usual cold self, mocking me. I never knew you were stupid enough to get drugged. One day, I overheard his twin brother, Ronan, say, "He was the one who mistook me for you that day." "Come on, bro, you're not still mad at me for that, are you?" Dylan said he and I were just for fun, anyway. "Then let us make your fun a little more interesting. Shall we? Bro, let us play a game." After that, Ronan would often pretend to be Dylan and spend the night with me. I played dumb and had my way with both of the gorgeous twins. The one who drugged me was some little starlet. I was born a player, a guy who loves the game, and half of New York City knew it. But while a little harmless flirting was fun, when it came to taking things further, say to the bedroom, I was a bit more selective. The starlet was gorgeous, but his schemes were flimsy and obvious. A beautiful idiot and not really my type. We'd run into each other a few times at different events. I teased him a bit, and he must have thought I was into him, that he had a real shot at getting into my bed. When I didn't make a move, he got impatient and decided to force the issue. Naturally, I left him flat. When I got home, I stumbled into the living room, shedding my tie, shirt, and jacket as I went, leaving a trail on the floor. Dylan, who was sitting on the sofa, asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you?" I swung my leg over his lap, straddling him, and cupped his face to kiss him. Dylan tried to pull away, struggling hard, his face flushing crimson, a rare sight. I licked the corner of his mouth, then took his hand and pressed it against my bare chest. He actually liked groping my pecs. In bed, he'd always work both sides until they were red and sore, sometimes even leaving bruises. But if I ever puffed out my chest and offered it to him, he'd just call me a slut in that cold, flat tone of his. "Dylan." I pressed my forehead against his, smiling woozily. "Don't play hard to get with me tonight, okay? Someone drugged me and I feel awful." Hearing that, Dylan froze for a long moment. I had no choice but to take matters into my own hands and started to unbuckle his belt. He grabbed my hand, his voice hoarse. "Jack, don't regret this." I leaned in and whispered a few words in his ear. His breath hitched, and a second later, he violently flipped me over, pinning me to the sofa. That night, we went from the living room downstairs all the way to the bedroom and bathroom upstairs. The drugs had long worn off, and I was so exhausted I wanted to push him away, but Dylan was tireless, tangling with me again and again. Dylan wasn't usually like this. In bed, he was always disciplined. But that night, he was so wild he almost made me pass out. And I did right as the sun came up. When I woke, it was already evening. The distant sea was painted with a thin layer of molten gold. I sat up, clutching the blanket, and rubbed my throbbing temples. Dylan was sitting on a nearby armchair, dressed immaculately in a suit, his face stern, showing no trace of fatigue. He saw me wake up and turned his heavy gaze on me. "You're up? How do you still have so much energy?" I couldn't help but complain. "You nearly killed me last night." Dylan snorted. "I never knew you were stupid enough to get drugged." "Thanks. You worked hard, too." I saw Ronan at dinner. Ronan and Dylan were identical twins, and I was always mixing them up when we were kids. But after getting to know them, you realized their personalities were worlds apart. Dylan was cold and severe, never showing his emotions, which made him hard to read. Ronan, by comparison, seemed much smoother. He was happy to keep up appearances for the sake of peace. Our father, the head of one of New York's 3 biggest crime families, had started as street muscle and fought his way to the top. And Ronan, well, let us just say he was more of a gentleman. He wasn't cut out for the life. In high school, he got caught in the middle of a street war. It was brutal. Someone got cut down right in front of him, splashing blood all over his face. The shock messed him up for a while, gave him a nervous breakdown. New York was a mess back then. To protect him, Dylan convinced our father to send him to study in Europe. Ronan had been overseas ever since. Late last year, our father was shot in the head on the street. Ronan rushed back for the funeral and just never left. At the dinner table, Ronan kept glancing my way. I knew he was looking at the marks on my neck. After my shower, ID just grabbed a tank top and a jacket from the closet. The neckline was low, but I couldn't be bothered to change. It's not like my thing with his brother was a secret. Ronan had figured it out within days of coming back. It happened at our father's wake. It was late, and the three of us brothers were still keeping vigil. Dylan had put on such a good show of being the grieving son at the funeral that day, he almost had me convinced. ID laughed and teased him about having a talent for acting. He shot me an icy look and said, "Takes one to know one." I glanced at the black and white photo of our father, then rested my chin on Dylan's shoulder and breathed softly in his ear. "You know, it's kind of sad. I sent it? Dad died without ever knowing I wasn't his real son." Dylan turned his head slightly but didn't say anything. Then again I added maybe he would been happy to know. After all, I'm the gay son who dragged his name through the mud. I grabbed his tie. Taking a step back, I leaned against the edge of the offering table and pulled him toward me. Dylan asked flatly what I was doing. I told him, I want to see if Dad will jump out of his coffin when he finds out his favorite son is messing around with a fag like me. Dylan sneered. He's dead and gone. His brains were splattered everywhere, remember? You'd know better than anyone. The man had zero romance in him. No passion, no initiative. If it weren't for that gorgeous face, he'd be a terrible lay. So I cut the crap and tilted my head back to kiss him. A cool breeze swept through the funeral hall, carrying our panting breaths with it. The funeral banners rustled, the altar trembled slightly, and one of the wreaths on the other side toppled over. In a pause between kisses, I opened my eyes and met a hateful glare. Ronan, of course. He'd been asleep, and his dear brother and I had rudely woken him up. He looked shocked, incredulous. He couldn't believe that in the few years he'd been away, I had somehow snatched his beloved brother from him. But he was worrying for nothing. Dylan and I weren't brothers, and we weren't lovers. In bed, we used each other. Out of it, we went our separate ways. I couldn't snatch him. Before Ronan went to Europe, he and I had actually been closer. He was just easier to get along with than Dylan. But now, under the circumstances, his attitude toward me had obviously become complicated. Catching Ronan stealing another look at me, I turned to him and smiled slightly. Ronan, why do you keep sneaking glances at me? You think your brother's being too rough, too? To be honest, just sitting here feels like I'm on pins and needles. I was exaggerating, of course. It wasn't that bad. I just wanted to stir the pot. Dylan warned me irritably, Jack. Ronan hesitated before saying, you could buy some ointment. Dylan shot him a look. Oh, I have ointment, I said with a grin, looking at Dylan. It's just not very convenient to apply it myself. Dylan was merciless. Figure it out. But later that night, he came to my room anyway. I was lying on my stomach, playing with a new Game Boy I'd just gotten, when I felt the mattress dip beside me. Where's the ointment? I'll help you. A hand rested gently on the small of my back. I turned my head to look at him, smiled, and said, so you do have a conscience, then gestured toward the nightstand. He got the ointment and sat down next to me again, pulling down the waistband of my pajama pants. Just then, my bedroom door opened again. A face identical to the man beside me appeared in the doorway. There I was, ass naked on the bed, while two mirror images of the same person stood frozen for a strange moment. Then the one at the door walked in. Ronan, what are you doing in here? I raised an eyebrow at Ronan, but Ronan's eyes were fixed on Dylan. Didn't you say you wouldn't help him with the ointment? He asked. Oh, it's you, Ronan, I said, rolling over and slowly pulling up my pants. Why didn't you say something when I mistook you for someone else? We almost had a huge misunderstanding. Ronan finally looked back at me, seemingly embarrassed. You didn't say a name, so I didn't realize. That face, those features, so beautiful. No matter the personality, anyone with that face was a certified stunner. Ice Cold had its own beauty, and so did putting on an act. If Dylan didn't have that face, I wouldn't have bothered trying to get a rise out of him all the time. I eventually got what I wanted, but it wasn't as fun as I'd imagined. He clearly just saw me as a tool. No worries, I said, winking at Ronan. It doesn't really matter who helps me. That's enough, Dylan interrupted, taking the ointment from Ronan. I'll do it. You can leave. After Ronan left, Dylan yanked my pants down without any ceremony. I pouted. Couldn't you be a little gentle like Ronan? Him? Gentle? Dylan snorted, rubbing the cream in his palm until it was warm before applying it. I let out a deliberate moan and got a hard slap on the ass for it, and not the flirty kind. It was a real solid smack. Don't fake it. Truly heartless. A few days later, I heard Dylan had caught the starlet who drugged me. I went down to the casino's basement and found him tied to a chair with a hemp rope. The chair had been kicked over, and his once perfect skin was covered in dust and blood. It was a shame he wasn't so appealing anymore. Dylan had been in a foul mood lately, and by the looks of it, he hadn't held back. Easy there, Dylan. I walked toward Dylan, passing the starlet, who suddenly grabbed my leg. I bent down and helped him up. His eyes were swollen shut, and his face was a mangled mess. You couldn't see a trace of his former good looks. Jack, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I was so wrong, please let me go. I'm begging you, let me go. He was crying pitifully, too. I brushed the hair from his face and gave him a gentle smile. You were wrong. Very, very wrong. Honey, I'm not a fan of pretty boys like you, but the person who wanted you caught this time, well, it wasn't me. The starlet froze. It wasn't you. I tilted my chin toward Dylan. You drugged me. Naturally, that upset my baby. Jack. Dylan snapped, annoyed again. But aren't you brothers? The starlet forgot to cry, his expression turning to sheer terror.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I deserve to die. Jack, I really know I was wrong. Please, can you save me? Please. TSK. Everyone knows I'm a soft touch. Dylan the one who's truly cold and ruthless. Whether he caught the guy for me or for himself, that made a big difference. After leaving the basement, I followed Dylan to his office. I hopped onto his desk, tilted my head, and asked, Bro, you're not really going to kill him, are you? Dylan tossed his jacket aside and straightened his tie before finally looking at me. Feeling sorry for him? I smiled. You know me, I've always had a soft spot for a pretty face. Humph. Dylan sneered. You've got so many pretty faces you could line them up twice around Manhattan. Which one exactly do you have a soft spot for? Our very own Dylan, of course. I grinned and tapped his chest with a pen, then got serious. For real, bro, just teach him a lesson. It's not worth killing him over something so small. Besides, he didn't even get what he wanted. You were the one who benefited that night, right? I shouldn't have brought that up. The moment I did, Dylan's expression darkened, a hint of fury showing through. I know what I'm doing. He stepped closer, and his eyes suddenly caught something. He yanked open my collar. The hickeys on my neck hadn't completely faded. His face was grim. Still there? I smirked. They don't disappear that fast. Dylan's thin lips tightened. His hand closed around my neck, his thumb pressing and rubbing hard against my skin. You don't actually like him, do you? It was Dylan's voice. Come to think of it, the twin brothers' voices were very similar, too. Except Dylan's was noticeably more monotone. Ronan shot back, what about you? I remember you used to despise him. You said he was disgustingly flippant. Why are you mixed up with him now? Dylan was silent. Ronan said, he was the one who mistook me for you that day. Come on, bro, you're not still mad at me for that, are you? Dylan said he and I were just for fun, anyway. If you're looking for fun, this is New York City. You can find any gorgeous man or woman you want. Why him? A flicker of irritation escaped Dylan's tone. He threw himself at me. I didn't have to be a saint. What are you getting at? Since you're just having fun with him. Ronan paused for a long time before speaking again. Then let us make your fun a little more interesting. Shall we? Bro, let us play a game. I quietly moved away from the study door. I'd been out of town on business and came back to New York early, just in time to overhear a conversation like that. Those two brothers thought they had me completely fooled with their little conspiracy. The truth was, I knew that night that the man in my bed wasn't Dylan. Maybe they never noticed, but I spent so much time playing with Dylan's hands that I knew them too well. The lines on Dylan's right palm were unique. A single, deep horizontal crease ran straight across it. I could trace it with my eyes closed. That night, when I was drugged, everything was a blur at first. But later, as the drugs started to wear off, I realized it wasn't Dylan's hand. But I didn't say a word. A shallow person like me, what did I see in Dylan if not his beautiful exterior? Ronan wore the same skin and had willingly offered himself up as my antidote. I had no complaints. And to be honest, for a split second, a thought did cross my mind. How would that great iceberg Dylan feel if he knew? Dylan didn't feel much of anything. He just went along with Ronan's cover story and took the opportunity to mock me for getting drugged. Fine. Twins, right? Telepathic. No secrets. Happy to share everything. Well, fine. I didn't mind having both of them. Last night's visitor was Ronan. He was gone from my room by the time I woke up. I washed up and went downstairs for breakfast. The moment I walked into the dining room, I saw two identical, handsome faces turn toward me in perfect, synchronized unison, like a pair of wind-up dolls. I smiled faintly. "Morning, Jack," Ronan said with a smile of his own. He seemed to be in a good mood. I couldn't tell with Dylan. He had his usual poker face on. I yawned, walked around behind Dylan, draped an arm over his shoulder, and leaned down to whisper in his ear, "Breakfast looks amazing today." Dylan glanced down and, for the first time ever, took my hand. He never showed affection like that in front of other people. Ronan froze. "Let us eat," Dylan said, quickly letting me go. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I picked up a shrimp dumpling with my chopsticks, offered it to Dylan, and just as he raised his bowl to take it, I changed direction and dropped it into Ronan's bowl instead. "You've been away for so many years, Ronan. You must have missed the food here." Dylan's face darkened as he put his bowl down. After breakfast, I went to the office with Dylan. These days, the family was running legitimate businesses. The company was listed, and under Dylan's management, it was thriving. The moment I got in the car, I started crowding him. Dylan kept trying to move his leg away, but I made sure we were touching. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "What do you want now?" I grinned. "I'm praising you. You took very good care of me last night." Dylan was flustered. "What are you talking ab?" He cut himself off, his thin lips pressing together as his face tensed up. After a long pause, he squeezed out a few more words. "It's the middle of the day. Don't talk to me about this stuff." I clicked my tongue. "You're such a classic case of screw you and forget you. Already forgotten what you said last night?" "What did I say?" "You said from now on you'd be good to me. Passionate. Baby. What did you call me?" Dylan cut me off coldly. He hated it when I called him that. "Baby," I said, feigning confusion and blinking. "What's wrong? You liked it well enough last night, didn't you?" Dylan took a deep breath and rolled the window halfway down, letting a breeze into the stuffy car. I laughed and gently kicked his shin with the toe of my shoe. "Feeling a little hot under the collar?" Dylan shot me an icy glare, then suddenly leaned over. With one hand braced on the back of my seat, he crushed his lips against mine. The kiss was longer, harder, and more painful than any he'd ever given me. His teeth even grazed the tip of my tongue. Not to be outdone, I fought back just as fiercely. He grabbed my chin, his voice dark. "Passionate enough for you?" I smiled languidly, my hand coiling around his tie and pulling him closer. "It's a start, but you should probably save some of that for later. Otherwise, you might run out when we get somewhere else, right?" That evening, just as I was about to head to my room, Dylan grabbed me. Before I could react, he had me pushed against the wall, trapping me in his shadow. In a rare show of initiative, he leaned down and kissed me right there in the hallway. He kissed me while rubbing my waist. At some point, Dylan must have come upstairs, because he was standing at the turn of the staircase, his expression unreadable as he watched us. I gave Dylan a little push. He glanced over, then opened my bedroom door and shoved me inside. As I was thrown onto the mattress, I laughed and asked him, "Did you kiss me out there for so long on purpose?" Dylan didn't answer. He just started unbuttoning his shirt, one button at a time. I lifted my foot to press against his abs. He caught my ankle, folded my leg, and pressed his whole body down on me. Ever since Ronan came back, you've been so full of passion for me, I said. Are you afraid I'll go looking for him if I'm not satisfied? Ah, Dylan's grip on my waist tightened viciously. I was getting excited. I rolled over and straddled him, grabbing a nearby tie and using it to bind his hands to the headboard. What are you doing? Dylan struggled. I smirked. Seeing how passionate you are, I figured you deserved a reward. Weren't we playing a game? And in a game, you have to mix things up. With Dylan unable to touch me, the pace and pressure were all up to me. His eyes were burning red, and he repeated my name over and over, his voice a mixture of hatred and weakness. I enjoyed seeing him like this. I had to admit, with Dylan, I always loved a challenge. He was, after all, such a cold and beautiful man. When he was around all day, you couldn't help but want to mess with him. But his way of dealing with his physical needs was simple and brutish. Sometimes he couldn't even be bothered to kiss or engage in any foreplay, he'd just do it in silence. I often tried to provoke more of a reaction from him, but he'd always shut me down, telling me I talked too much. Now I discovered that for someone like Dylan, the best position was on his back, with someone riding him. I stopped right at his breaking point and asked, "Do you like it, brother?" Suddenly, Dylan broke free from the tie. Like a wild beast escaping its cage, he pinned me beneath him. Sweat dripped from the tips of his hair. His voice was raw and dangerous. "What about you? Do you like it?" The next day, Ronan's eyes widened when he saw the 2 red marks on Dylan's wrists from the tie. He and I had never played like that. Who would have thought Dylan had such a mischievous side? He was usually so buttoned up in his suits, but that day he came downstairs wearing just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, as if to make sure everyone saw the marks. I played along, showing my concern. I took his hand from the table and examined it. "You broke the skin. Does it hurt?" Dylan let me play with his hand, saying calmly, "It doesn't hurt." Ronan sat silently to the side, dropping several sugar cubes into his coffee cup and stirring them with a clatter. "It's sickeningly sweet." After one sip, Ronan tossed the spoon onto the porcelain saucer and stormed off, his face a mask of displeasure. I clicked my tongue and said to Dylan, "What is he so mad about? Don't tell me he has fallen for me." "Too?" Dylan glanced at me. "What do you mean, too?" I grinned shamelessly. "You love me and he loves me, too. Is that not right? Don't flatter yourself." Dylan pulled his hand away. "How can you expect someone to give you something you don't even have yourself?" "You've got a point," I said with a shrug. "Then never mind." "So, what are you so mad about, baby?" I leaned in close to Dylan's face. "Don't call me baby." He pushed my face away, his expression blank. After that, he refused to say another word to me. "Something you don't even have yourself." Love? Actually, if I had to say, there were a few moments in the past when I did feel love for Dylan. Like when my mother jumped from the roof of the rehab center, landing right at my feet, and he stepped in front of me, turned, and held me tight, covering my eyes and letting me tremble while I clutched his clothes. In that moment, I felt like fate had been so cruel to me. One day, my mother was gently stroking my face and telling me she loved me the next. She had shattered her fragile life right in front of me. Life was so light, and death was so heavy. In the worst moment of my life, Dylan's arms were the only good thing. He didn't let me see my mother after that. He handled the funeral arrangements all by himself. It wasn't until the day of the funeral that I saw her again. He gave me back a mother who was sleeping, beautiful, and at peace, a mother no longer broken by death. I think I loved that little bit of good. Or the day I finally put a bullet in our father. It was the last day of the year, the first anniversary of my mother's death. Sometime before that, I met a man who told me that our father wasn't my real father. My real father had been killed by him. I finally understood why my mother had been so miserable and depressed for all those years. My real father and our father had been brothers in the gang, partners who had faced death together. Then he met my mother, and they fell deeply in love. But our father had betrayed him, stealing her for himself. He had so many women, Dylan and Ronan's mother was one of them. But to him, all women were just temporary playthings. He would use any means necessary to get them, and once he got tired of them, he cast them aside like trash. Even when I thought he was my father, his list of crimes was long enough. Being his sons was a shared misfortune for me, Dylan, and Ronan. My mother was forced by him to shoot her own lover. Maybe he thought it was fun? He put a gun in her hand, blindfolded her, and told her, if just one of your bullets hits the target, you win. And if you win, I'll let you both go. How about it? She couldn't escape. Even though she didn't believe him, she had to take the gamble. How could she have known? When she took off the blindfold, she saw her lover's body, still twitching, his eyes open in death. From then on, her mental state was never stable. I think she had to make a choice for me, still just an embryo, to let me call her enemy father so he wouldn't kill me. Every tear she shed, every nightmare she had over the years, pushed her further down the path of self-destruction. And I think maybe she hated me too. If I hadn't come along at such an inconvenient time, she could have been free much sooner. Does death need a special occasion? Maybe she thought the weather was nice that day, perfect for dying, so she stood on the edge of the roof and took a little leap. But I chose the day for him. I chose the day our father would die. A monster like him deserved to be an offering for my mother. Didn't he? On New Year's Eve, there was an unwritten rule in the New York underworld. Every year on that day, a few of the old-timers and the heavy hitters from the 3 major families would book a restaurant for a meal and a meeting, the so-called year-end gathering. To the public, it was about building relationships and fostering cooperation. Internally, it was a high-stakes game where the bosses, each with their own agenda, would show up with their crews, both seen and unseen. The black cars they arrived in would line the entire street in front of the restaurant. Killing him that day meant I most likely wouldn't get away. But I still had to choose that day. Maybe I would die too. But life or death, fate would decide. My parents, watching from above, would decide. I disguised myself as a blonde woman in a long trench coat that covered me from head to toe. As they left the restaurant after their meeting, I stood across the street and put a single, precise bullet into our father's temple. A gunshot, a spray of blood, and the entire street erupted into chaos. I was injured. To shake off the bodyguards on my tail, I ducked into the bustling crowd. They weren't brazen enough to start shooting in a crowded street. Then I crashed right into a man. I looked up, and through the dark lenses of my sunglasses, I saw Dylan's face. In that instant, the world seemed to freeze into a black and white silent film frame. Dylan's beautiful eyes reflected the brilliant New Year's fireworks, but they were dark. People swarmed around us, all out celebrating the new year. Such a festive day. No one knew that the 2 men who had just collided were brothers, separated by the murder of a father. I accepted my fate. Grabbing his arm, I whispered, "Dylan." He said nothing, just turned and dragged me away. Dylan hid me in a secret safe house. I asked, "Are you going to avenge him?" Dylan said, "It's good that he is dead." I asked again, "Then will you keep my secret?" Dylan said, "What will you give me in return?" I smiled, tilting my head to look at him. "My body? Is that enough?" He looked down at me and asked coldly, "You think you're that charming?" "I do, brother," I said. I pulled his tie down and tilted my head up to kiss him. I thought he would refuse, but maybe because he felt sorry for me, he passively accepted it. Dylan had no kissing skills to speak of. For a long time, the only thing he did was open his mouth and let me push my tongue inside. Revenge, blood, violence, pursuit, all of it was like sex, leaving you unsettled for a long time. When my hands started to wander over Dylan's body, I didn't know if it was trembling from pain, from desire, or from something else entirely. That night, it felt like I loved Dylan. Never before had I been so desperate to get him into bed. I didn't even care about the pain from my wound. As cold as Dylan was, he was still just a man. And men have desires. Desires are weaknesses. And where there are weaknesses, I can slip in. So, is love born from something like that really love? Is it just a product of necessity, as fleeting as morning dew? Or is it something worth taking seriously? I went to visit my mother's grave again. Whenever I was confused, I went to see her. Sometimes she would listen in silence, other times she would send me a gust of wind. But that day, a dark cloud suddenly rolled in, and she sent me a sudden, urgent downpour. I didn't leave. I just sat there in front of her grave. That night, I came down with a high fever and had a long, rambling dream. I dreamed of all this, of everything related to love. I dreamed of my mother, of Dylan, and even of Ronan. I was 10 when our father brought me to live with them. By then, my mother's mental health had deteriorated, and he had already sent her to a private facility. He rarely let me see her. He said if you spent too much time with crazy people, you'd go crazy too. Dylan and Ronan were 13 then. Dylan clearly wasn't happy to have me there, but Ronan gave me a smile. I guess I have a thing for punishment. Ronan smiled at me, and I ignored him. Dylan snorted and walked away, and I couldn't stop watching him go. Ronan kindly introduced him. That's my brother, Dylan. We're twins. Dylan. I repeated his name in my dream. In my haze, I heard someone whispering in my ear. What is it? Jack? Jack? My breath was hot, my eyelids heavy. I forced them open a crack and saw a blurry silhouette in the dim light. I knew it was Dylan. On the edge of sleep, I grabbed his hand and gently, repeatedly traced the line across his palm with my finger. Dylan, do you believe that I loved you once? Just now, in my dream. Dylan was silent. I fell asleep to his silence. After I recovered, I completely forgot about my delirious rambling. But a few days later, Dylan ended up in the hospital. He wasn't sick, he was injured. This was a rare occurrence. In his early 20s, Dylan was a fearsome figure, respected even by the family's top enforcers. Our father had valued him highly back then. He demolded his son into a tool for carving out territory. He demolded him so hard that Dylan became a beautiful, chilling ice sculpture. And when he died, Dylan was glad. But by now, Dylan no longer had to get his hands dirty with that kind of violence. I heard he was just teaching a lesson to a few low-level thugs who'd been paid to stir up trouble at the new casino. It was a trivial matter. And even if he was just stretching his legs, how did he get stabbed in the shoulder? With his skills, that shouldn't have been possible. No matter how I thought about it, it didn't make sense. I hung up the phone and rushed to the hospital, where I overheard two of our guys smoking and chatting by the flower beds. No way. I saw it myself, so don't spread rumors. After he beat the guys up, Dylan grabbed a knife from nearby and stuck it in his own shoulder. How should I know why? Who can figure Dylan out? Have you ever understood him? So it wasn't serious. I slowed my pace. Dylan's wound healed with incredible slowness. He was careless, reopening it several times just when it was about to heal. This went on for a long time. I secretly laughed about it until I finally caught him tearing the wound open himself. I couldn't help but call him out. You don't want to play that stupid game with Ronan anymore, do you? If you don't want to play, just say so. No need to resort to such a desperate, idiotic move. It was obvious. Until his wound fully healed, Ronan couldn't impersonate him. Just like before, when his wrist was scraped raw from breaking free of the tie, Ronan couldn't do anything either. Ronan couldn't give himself the exact same injuries in the exact same places. That would be too strange. But how long could a tactic like this last? Was he going to keep hurting himself for the rest of his life? It was a bit clumsy. Too clumsy for Dylan. When he heard what I said, a rare array of expressions crossed Dylan's face. Confusion, shock, embarrassment, panic, and then, of course, it all settled back into composure. He asked me, "You knew all along?" I smiled faintly. "Did you want me to know?" Dylan asked, "When?" "A very, very long time ago," I said. "Are you happy with that answer?" Dylan was silent for a moment. "So you knew it wasn't me, and you still slept with him. Why did it have to be you?" I laughed, walking over to the bed. I lifted Dylan's chin and looked at him with amusement. "Are you angry, Dylan?" Dylan forcefully turned his face away. "I always knew you were that kind of person. There's nothing to be angry about." "Oh, that's not true. I used to be the one sleeping with other people. Now I'm being generous and letting you two brothers sleep with me." Dylan's face went pale, then even paler. He had just been in pain from reopening his wound and had lost blood. His face was already colorless. I was surprised to learn that a person's face could be even whiter than completely colorless. He said, his face ashen, "I'm sorry." I smiled sweetly. "And what are you willing to do for your sorry?" I pulled the gun from the back of my waistband and pressed the muzzle against his wound. He looked up at me, then took the gun without expression. Just as he turned the barrel toward his own shoulder and was about to pull the trigger, someone burst through the door. Ronan snatched the gun from Dylan's hand and, with incredible speed, fired a shot into his own shoulder. Blood soaked half his shirt. For a second, his face was contorted in a snarl. Then he clenched his jaw, the veins on his forehead bulging. He asked me, "Is that enough?" "It's enough. Any more and I'd start to worry." I took the gun back and smiled at him, then leaned in close to his ear. "Ronan, if you really like sleeping with me, you don't have to pretend to be your brother. With that face, I'll let you into my bed." After saying that, I turned back to look at Dylan. Dylan's lips were pressed together. His beautiful eyes filled with 1,000 emotions. I waited, but he didn't speak. But what was I waiting for him to say? There wasn't really anything left to say. I was their fun and they were mine. Now, for some reason, that balance was broken. Our lives were just going to go back to being boring. It wasn't a big deal. It was just, what a shame. At that moment, I thought, this fun little game is over. That was 1999. Caught up in it all, I didn't know that it wasn't just the game. So many things ended in 1999. Jack left without a backward glance. In the room, Dylan and Ronan, each with a wound on his shoulder, were left in a long, silent standoff. Dylan was experienced in dressing wounds, and the medical kit was fully stocked. He silently treated Ronan's gunshot wound. Finally, it was Ronan who broke the silence. "Is someone like him worth you doing something so stupid?" Dylan closed his eyes wearily but didn't answer. Of course he knew it was a stupid thing to do. But if he didn't, Ronan could keep pretending to be him. And he was finding that harder and harder to bear. When Jack had deliriously said he loved him in a dream, Dylan had been so flustered he didn't know what to do. Dylan had always believed he didn't love Jack. He admitted that Jack had a certain inexplicable magnetism. Jack was handsome to begin with, and with his naturally flirtatious looks, he was even more deadly. When he whispered sweet nothings, he had a mysterious expression that made you believe him and not believe him at the same time. In that vacillation between belief and disbelief, he would slowly occupy your thoughts. And yet, when he smiled, his eyes would curve, and he was almost cute. Dylan had once declared that he hated Jack's flippancy. He wouldn't admit it was because he had unwittingly spent so much time trying to figure out what was real and what was fake about Jack. Whatever Jack gave him, he could just as easily give to Ronan or to countless others. If Dylan ever wavered for a moment because of his ambiguous words and actions, he would despise his own foolishness. Back then, they were still brothers. But what did brother mean to Jack? He wasn't serious. He didn't care about anyone else. When he tucked a rose into Dylan's breast pocket, it was to please himself, regardless of whether Dylan was pleased. Maybe it was even better if Dylan wasn't pleased, because he wanted to see the beautiful man get angry. The beautiful man wouldn't get angry. He discovered that the best way to deal with him was to simply ignore him. In fact, Dylan had known for years that Jack wasn't his father's biological son. He first learned that Jack's mother had been taken by force, and then he found out she had a lover she was deeply in love with when she was young. He didn't know why, but on a whim, he took a drop of blood from Jack's finger one night when he was drunk. It was the mid-90s and paternity testing had just become available in the city. The day the results came back, Dylan read the last page and then burned the report. He never revealed the secret, just as he later never revealed the secret that it was Jack who had killed their father. To reveal or not to reveal, it was all up to him. There was really no reason to protect this brother he disliked, who wasn't even related to him by blood. But Dylan looked at Jack countless times, and Jack was always so carefree. Ever since Jack's mother died, he had a feeling that one day Jack would just disappear somewhere, never to be found again. Dylan didn't like uncertainty. If Jack left, there were a million possibilities across the world. But if Jack stayed here in New York, in this house, there was only one. Dylan thought, to make Jack stay, maybe he should make him indebted to him. Besides, if Jack killed their father, he would be hunted by the entire underworld. Did Jack deserve to die? He had gotten rid of their father. For that alone, he didn't. Dylan eventually cleaned up the mess of the assassination, covering for Jack. To the outside world, Jack was still his youngest brother. When it came to love, Dylan didn't understand it and didn't want to. In this, he was very different from Jack. Jack knew what love was but chose not to love, because love was too heavy, and he was too light. Love was as heavy as death. Dylan, on the other hand, was completely outside love's orbit. His and Ronan's mother was a woman who had burned herself to ashes for love. He couldn't understand what there was to love about a scumbag like their father. The only explanation he could come up with was that love was like a drug. A small dose could make a person blind and deaf, make them give up their very self. Did his mother see from heaven after she died? Their father didn't grieve for a single day. One day he even brought home a 10-year-old boy. The loving memories she clung to in her illness were expired. Rotten things. She was too sick to see it, to smell it. Dylan felt he didn't need to love anyone. But besides love, a person still has desire. Jack was like an agent of some divine will. God would not allow his subjects to remain untouched in this world. So whenever someone like that appeared, he would send another to corrupt him. Dylan believed he was compelled by desire, that he had no choice but to obey. And then one day he discovered he was completely and utterly wrong. When Dylan learned that Jack had been drugged, had mistaken Ronan for him, and had spent the night with him, his first feeling was a directionless rage. Great, it was his own twin brother. So, was he supposed to thank the heavens for being merciful? At least it wasn't some random stranger. Dylan laughed coldly to himself. Jack was incredible, he thought. Truly incredible. He gets himself drugged, and he can't even recognize the person he sleeps with all the time. If everyone who'd ever been with a twin was as clueless as him, the world would be a mess. But then again, it was Jack. And that made it sickeningly plausible. When had Jack ever taken anyone seriously? He and Ronan looked so much alike. In Jack's mind, there probably wasn't much of a difference between them anyway. All Jack ever saw was that pretty face. In reality, Dylan had never agreed to Ronan's so-called game. Ronan had started it on his own without his consent. Once the game began, Dylan didn't know how to stop it. Was he supposed to expose Ronan? He couldn't bring himself to expose his own brother. He felt he shouldn't. Dylan knew exactly what kind of person Jack was. Jack was warm on the surface but cold inside, passionate yet heartless. He held everyone in his heart, yet no one was truly there. Since the mix-up had already happened, Dylan preferred that Jack never knew he'd had a physical relationship with Ronan. Dylan had an inexplicable certainty that if Jack found out, he wouldn't feel embarrassed or guilty. Instead, he would just go with the flow and continue with Ronan. If that was the case, he'd rather Jack believed it had always been him. Every time his temples throbbed, he wondered when he had become so tolerant. He knew he could never be more tolerant than this again. After dressing the wound, Ronan looked at Dylan and said, "Don't tell me you've actually fallen for him now." Dylan wouldn't lie to him. "I don't know," he said. Ronan argued, "He couldn't even tell us apart at first. How much do you think he really cares about you? I didn't mind when you said you were just having fun with him, but are you actually catching feelings? Dylan, are you going to betray me?" Dylan just shook his head vaguely. This made Ronan even angrier. He became agitated, and the movement pulled at his wound, making his expression pained and fierce. "Dylan, who in this world understands you better than I do? Who loves you more than I do? We are one. The two of us together make a whole person. Are you trying to give your other half to someone else now? Have you ever thought about how I would feel? Have you ever thought about how lonely I would be?" Yes, they were closer than ordinary brothers. They were twins. Before they were even born, they were destined to be deeply engraved in each other's lives. Their mother died when they were very young. Their father, for a few years, was struggling, and when he was in a bad mood, he would take it out on them. This made them both agree later that Jack was lucky. Jack didn't live with their father every day, so he probably wasn't beaten much as a child. By the time he was brought into the family, their father was successful and didn't take his frustrations out on them as often. When they huddled together in a corner, crying and putting medicine on each other's bruises, what kind of life was Jack living? Was he nestled sweetly in his mother's arms? Which is why he had that sweet smile on his face. Ronan actually resented Jack. Not just because there was another person in the world with a blood connection to him and Dylan, which felt no different from a third person intruding on their relationship, but also because this person was definitely happier than they were. Their father barely paid him any attention, and that was his greatest happiness. However, Ronan was very good at pretending. He instinctively disliked direct conflict. He also had a natural, possessive feeling for Dylan, unique to twins. He was willing to sacrifice himself to get closer to Jack, just to keep Jack and Dylan apart. Jack always made Ronan feel insecure. He knew Dylan too well. When had Dylan ever bothered to comment on anyone? Even though his comments about Jack were negative, for Dylan to expend any emotion on someone was already something special. But Dylan never got very close to Jack. Later, Ronan was persuaded by Dylan to spend a few years abroad. During those years, Dylan often flew to visit him. Whenever they talked about Jack, Dylan seemed to have little to say. When he mentioned that Jack wasn't their biological brother, he sounded indifferent. Ronan was pleased, celebrating the fact that no one in the world could have a bond with Dylan as close as his. He even hoped Jack would just pack up and leave. To his surprise, not only was Jack still there, but the moment he returned, he walked in on him and Dylan kissing in their father's funeral hall. Ronan was furious. How did Jack do it? How on earth did he manage that? Ronan secretly watched Jack every day. His looks were decent, of course. Dylan's standards weren't that low. And after all these years, his features had matured nicely. But his personality, wasn't it still just as flashy and ostentatious? He winked at him right in front of Dylan. He was nothing but a promiscuous slut. The night Jack was drugged and mistook him for Dylan, Ronan thought, it's not my fault, right? Jack was the one who got it wrong. He really wanted to know how the ever-cold Dylan managed to be so intimate with someone. And he really wanted to know if Jack had some special talent in bed. When he told Dylan what happened, Ronan knew Dylan was angry. Even though Dylan's face was blank, they were twins. He could feel it. It was probably only because it was him, Ronan, that Dylan could tolerate it. If it had been anyone else, Dylan might have pulled a gun. An image flashed in Ronan's mind. Dylan, pressing a gun to his head, telling him, Jack is mine. Ronan thought this and then chuckled. Impossible. No one would ever be more important than his brother. When Ronan proposed the game to Dylan, he meant, let us play. Show me you don't care. But Dylan refused. Ronan sneered and, that same night, pretended to be him and went to Jack's room. This time, Jack wasn't drugged, and he still didn't recognize him. Ronan was furious. He was angry about so many things, or maybe just angry that Jack clearly didn't care about Dylan at all. He was so angry he spent most of the night tormenting him. When they were finished, Jack lit a cigarette, hooked a finger under his chin, and smiled at him. You're incredible, baby. Ronan almost lost it and pinned him down again. Luckily, he managed to keep his composure. That was close. After that, almost every time he was with Jack, Ronan was filled with rage. He could mimic Dylan's expression and demeanor perfectly. On the surface, you couldn't tell a thing. But inside, he was seething. Jack was just so infuriating. He was so good with words, so uninhibited in bed, calling him brother one moment, baby the next, and then Dylan, Dill. He especially loved to say Dylan's name. There were times when Ronan didn't know what he was thinking. As he held Jack's chin and forced him to look at him, he had a desperate urge to tell him, you've got the wrong person. I'm not Dylan. It was Jack's fault. Jack was too good at seducing people. Jack had some kind of spell. He had actually made Dylan do something so boring, so stupid, just to stop him from impersonating him. They should both stay far away from a person like that. Ronan angrily knocked over the medical kit. He grabbed Dylan's collar, stared at him fiercely, and asked again, "Dylan, are you really going to betray me for him?" Two identical, beautiful faces were now inches apart, like reflections in a mirror. They were two separate people. This was as close as they could get. How could they truly be one? They were two individuals. From the moment they were born, they had two different wills. Dylan asked calmly, "How could I betray you?" Ronan's lips trembled. He suddenly placed his hand on the back of Dylan's neck and pulled him in fiercely, only to gently press their foreheads together. Just like when they were kids, telling each other, "I'm right here, right in front of you." Dylan closed his eyes. He took several deep breaths. So did Ronan, until everything was quiet. Ronan said, "Do you have to have him? Bro, give him to me." Dylan slowly opened his eyes. "You like him?" Ronan stared at him intently. "You like him?" Dylan said, "Is that why?" Ronan didn't answer. Dylan was quiet for a moment, then finally said coldly, "Then you can go ask him if he's only going to choose one of us." As the words left his mouth, a wave of confusion washed over Dylan. He wanted to know what Jack really thought. He wanted to know if Jack would ever fall in love with someone. He wanted to know if he was really falling for Jack. But these questions seemed so trivial. They were questions that, even if asked, would never get a clear answer. Jack would just give him that mysterious look and offer some cryptic reply. And, as always, Dylan wouldn't be able to tell if it was true or false. Taking the fake as real and the real as fake, that seemed to be Jack's guiding principle. Compared to them, Jack was the one who could truly see everything as a game. But could he really stay on the sidelines forever? One day in the year 2000, I woke up to find that my eyes were broken. Couldn't see a thing. I didn't know what had happened. I only vaguely remembered that Dylan and I had been through something. I didn't know where I was either. I slowly sat up and fumbled around beside me. "Is anyone there?" I asked. A hand reached out and grabbed mine. I felt a deep crease running across the palm and said, "Dylan?" Dylan grunted in affirmation. "It's me." I turned my head, but my world was still black. I felt a pang of regret. That beautiful face, I was afraid I'd never get to see it again. I remembered a lot of things and I'd forgotten a lot of things. For instance, I had to ask to find out that it was already the year 2000. I had slept from the 20th century into the 21st. Dylan told me that we had been set up by some people in the business and had almost died at sea. We were lucky. The ocean currents had washed us ashore, and we managed to survive. I chuckled. "Then I guess you got me into this mess." "Yes."
"I'm sorry."
"Forget it. Who wants to be mixed up with them and their dirty dealings anyway?" I hadn't forgotten everything. I still knew we were hated because of money and power. I asked Dylan, "Where are we?" Dylan didn't answer. I reached out and touched his face and realized he seemed to be crying. His cheeks were wet. The next second, he pulled me into a fierce hug, burying his face in my neck and soaking it with his tears. I'd never seen him so vulnerable. I gently patted his back. Later, he told me I had been in a coma for a long time, waking up briefly a few times and calling his name. That was when he realized I couldn't see, but I didn't remember any of it. Life really is unpredictable, no. I can't blame it all on unpredictability. For people in our line of work, you live day to day. Scheming, fighting, killing for a piece of turf, for a little money, or maybe for some sense of loyalty. It's all a heavy burden. Being a crime boss sounds glamorous, but your death could be more gruesome than anyone else's. First, there was our father, who I shot in the head. Then there was Dylan, tricked onto a boat and almost blown to bits by a bomb. It's actually good to be out of the storm now. I had wanted to leave for a long time. I couldn't quite explain why I had stayed. When I woke up, Dylan and I were in a seaside fishing village, but we didn't stay long. Once we were well enough, Dylan took me inland, to the Midwest. I asked him about the family business and where Ronan had gone. He said someone would take care of it, and that Ronan had gone back to Europe. Officially, we were both dead. The family was in chaos, and we couldn't get involved in that mess again, so we had no way of contacting Ronan. Unaware that we were still alive, Ronan had left New York on his own. He had lived in Europe for many years. With us gone, it was the best place for him. How strange. What a strange fate. As far as my memory went, it wasn't too long ago that the three of us were in an awkward standoff after ID exposed their game. And now, Dylan and I were bound together like this. I tried to be understanding. Is Ronan really okay? You don't have to worry about me. If you get a chance, you should go find him. Dylan was silent for a moment. There's no rush. He is safe. With you like this, I have to get you settled first. But Ronan didn't seem like the type who could handle all the trouble in the family. Our father was dead. Dylan was dead. I was dead. Could he really have gotten out of New York all by himself? We ended up in a city in the Midwest, far from any ocean. After almost dying at sea, I didn't like the ocean anymore. I told Dylan I wanted to go somewhere without a sea, as far away from it as possible. So we came here. We arrived during a late spring cold snap. It was colder than any cold I'd felt in my 20-plus years. By the time we opened the dessert shop, it was the height of summer, and it was scorching hot, even hotter than New York. Yes, a man like Dylan, with 1,000 ways to make a living, had opened a dessert shop. I laughed and asked him what he was thinking. He said it was something I had mentioned. I thought about it for a long time but couldn't remember. I'd said a lot of nonsense in my life, but he was probably telling the truth because I did love desserts. During this time, Dylan got in touch with Ronan. They even had a few overseas calls. To reassure me, Dylan put him on speaker. Ronan had nothing to say to me. I said hi from the side, but he acted like he didn't hear me and kept talking without missing a beat. So heartless. And here I was, worried about him out of a sense of brotherly affection and, well, because we had shared a bed. I asked Dylan, is he still holding a grudge about that gunshot? Dylan said he brought it on himself. Don't worry about him. Later, Ronan even said he wanted to come find us and live with us, but Dylan told him not to bother. Just live your own life over there. Things are different now. There's no room for a third person here. Ronan hung up in a huff. Life gradually became very different from our days in New York. We ran a small dessert shop, opening early every morning and closing on time every night. Sometimes, when there were no customers, I'd sit behind the register and space out, listening to the sounds of the street outside, and I'd wonder, am I dreaming? Or have I moved on to the next life? Or maybe, have I entered a parallel universe? In any case, this was not the life I was supposed to be living. This piece felt like something I had stolen. That night, I had another nightmare. I woke up with a start to the sound of a violent storm raging outside. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I got up, fumbling my way out to check if the windows were closed. To my surprise, Dylan was in the living room. He said he couldn't sleep and asked why I was up. I just had a nightmare. I hesitated for a moment but then said, Dylan, I dreamed you were dead. Dylan immediately came over and took my hand, pulling me down to sit close beside him. Did you dream about the explosion on the boat? Dylan placed my hand on his chest, letting me feel his heartbeat. Don't be scared. We're both alive and well. My fingertips slowly warmed to his touch. I curled my fingers, then slowly reached up to his face, tracing it for a long time before finally taking his right hand to play with. I felt that line on his palm again. I had always just liked Dylan's hands, they were beautiful. I never thought that one day I wouldn't be able to see, and the most distinct part of him I could feel would be this hand. I traced it over and over until his palm grew damp. Dylan closed his fingers, clasping my hand. I said, Ronan doesn't have this line on his hand. That time I mistook you for him. I only realized it when I touched his hand. Did you know that? Dylan said he knew. When I was injured and unconscious, I would wake up occasionally and hold his hand, searching for that line. He had guessed. I smiled faintly. To him, that line was like air, so familiar he didn't even notice it. Neither he nor Ronan had ever thought about it. In the end, that line became a secret only I knew. I touched Dylan's lips, wanting to press my own against them, but I didn't succeed. My lips only brushed his cheek. He had turned his head slightly, dodging the kiss. Dylan's attitude was unsettling. He was even more withdrawn than before, which was understandable, given what we'd been through. But why was he drawing such a clear line between us? When I'd try to tease him, he wouldn't respond. When I'd try to get close, he would subtly pull away. To all our neighbors and new friends, we were the perfect brothers, the blind younger brother cared for by his devoted older brother. What could be more perfect? But what was the reality? We had done everything two people could do together. Could we really be just innocent, blameless brothers? I didn't know what game he was playing with me. He couldn't have had some life-altering epiphany after a near-death experience, renouncing all worldly desires to become a monk. Could he? But that night, I saw the desire in him. When he dodged my kiss, I refused to give up. I touched the scar on his shoulder from the knife wound he had repeatedly torn open, and I leaned down to kiss it. I felt his breath catch, so I licked it gently. He gripped my shoulder, his voice low. "Jack, For some reason, he stopped himself. As my tongue traveled up his shoulder, his ragged breathing became impossible to hide. His hand seemed to want to push me away, but at the same time, it seemed like it was about to pull me in fiercely. I was on the verge of breaking through his defenses when a knock came at the door. In the middle of the night, in a downpour, our neighbor, a single mother, was at the door asking for help. Her daughter had eaten something bad and had been throwing up all night. Her medicine cabinet was empty, so she had come to see if we had anything for an upset stomach. We were two single men. We weren't organized enough to keep common medicines on hand. In the end, Dylan braved the rain and carried the little girl to a nearby clinic. The woman's name was Ms. Henderson. She was a divorced single mom, and according to the neighbors, she was quite a beauty and a very kind person. Everyone in the neighborhood looked out for her and her daughter. Once you help someone once, you end up helping them again. By my rough count, in the last 2 weeks, Dylan had already changed a light bulb, fixed a fan, and picked her daughter up from school for her several times. The little girl was still in preschool, and with the innocence of a child, she had already asked Dylan if he was going to be her daddy. After Ms. Henderson took her daughter home, I crossed my arms and sneered at Dylan. "Congratulations, Dylan," I said. "You're going to be a father soon." Dylan replied, "Are you really taking a child's words seriously? Then why do you think she wants you to be her father? Obviously, Ms. Henderson is quite taken with you and wants to build a happy new family together." Dylan didn't say anything and tried to walk past me. I blocked his way with my arm. "Cat got your tongue?" Dylan was unusually calm. "You're talking nonsense. I have nothing to say." His indifferent, "it has nothing to do with me" tone pissed me off. Sure, he had a thing with me, but he himself said it was just for fun. Did that mean he wasn't interested in women? Dylan wasn't the type to help someone just because they asked. Ronan, maybe. Ronan was the type to at least put on a show. If Dylan truly didn't care, he would say, "Sorry, I'm busy," without batting an eye, no matter how free he was. Fine. If he had nothing to say to me, then what did I have to say to him? What did it have to do with me? I was just a blind, disabled brother who had to shamelessly rely on him for care. And not even a real brother. A huge burden. Suddenly, a wave of despair washed over me. I had lived for over 20 years and had never felt so melodramatic. I used my cane to push him aside and stormed back to my room with a grim face. But even my familiar surroundings betrayed me, and I tripped over something. I fell hard. My knee hurt, my ankle hurt, and I just sat there on the floor, hugging my legs. Dylan heard the noise and opened the door. He silently bent down, picked me up, placed me on the bed, and asked, "Where are you hurt?" I snapped, "Everywhere. From head to toe, inside and out." Dylan sat down, took my ankle and gently rubbed it. "I won't help her anymore. I'll tell her to ask other neighbors." "So, you don't like women, is that it?" I felt around with my foot and then precisely placed it between his legs. Dylan tensed up, patted the bed. "Then sleep with me tonight. In my bed." Dylan was silent for a moment, then said, "Not right now." "Then get out." I kicked him away without mercy. A fight broke out in the shop today. It sounded like two groups of young guys who already had beef with each other. You know how it is. Some grudge you can't even remember, Maybe they bumped into each other on the street once. They ran into each other in my little shop and started throwing punches without any regard for me. The owner. Dylan and I didn't come from a clean background. Back in New York, we seen scenes like this plenty of times. If I weren't blind now, I could have tossed a couple of them out myself. Luckily, Dylan was still in one piece. There were about 5 or 6 of them in total. I figured that was nothing for Dylan, so I confidently pushed him forward. Tell them to take it outside. Don't trash the place. To my surprise, Dylan actually got the worst of it. I heard some little punk say, "Who the hell are you? Mind your own business. Get lost." Then I heard Dylan grunt. I panicked and took a couple of steps out from behind the counter, just as Dylan slammed into me. Someone had punched him square in the face. I could feel the blood under his nose. That really pissed me off. Of all places, why did they have to hit his face? That face was probably the most valuable thing he had left. Just then, another guy was shoved toward me. I grabbed him by feel and started kicking the crap out of him. There was a crash of tables and chairs, and he went down, groaning. After that, it was chaos. Dylan was trying to protect me, I was trying to reason with those bastards, and we were surrounded. Dylan couldn't shield me from everything. A hand came out of nowhere and shoved me hard. My head hit the wall, and the impact made my whole world ring. I was stunned for a moment. I couldn't even hear the sounds around me clearly. "Jack?" Dylan asked urgently. "Are you okay?" I shook my head and turned my face. For a second, I almost thought I saw his worried expression. No, not thought. I think I actually saw something. Blurry light, blurry shapes, a blurry everything. An old doctor once told me that my eyes weren't physically damaged. My blindness was likely caused by a blockage in my brain pressing on the optic nerve. He said maybe one day the blockage would clear, and my sight would return. I treated it as a joke, but who knew there was some truth to it? I stared at Dylan without blinking. It wasn't perfectly clear, but that face. It had been so long. Tears almost welled up in my eyes. Seeing me frozen, Dylan called out again, "Jack?" I quickly turned my head to face the white wall and blinked several times. "I'm fine." Dylan and I must have forgotten how to be law-abiding citizens, because when the fight broke out, our first instinct wasn't to call the police. Someone else eventually did, and when the cops arrived, it belatedly dawned on me that, we didn't have to handle it ourselves. After everything was sorted out, we went home. Dylan brought out some liniment to rub on my bruises and asked if it still hurt. I laughed. "This is nothing. Remember when we used to lead our guys into fights? It hurt way more than this every time. Do you remember that time we were being chased by our rivals and I got slashed? You carried me on your back for blocks." Dylan's hand paused for a second. "Yeah. I bled so much that day, your shirt was half soaked in red. You thought I was gonna die, didn't you? It was the first time I saw your eyes get red. Like you were about to cry. Hiss." "Sorry," Dylan said, pulling his hand away immediately. "I used too much force. It's okay." I continued, "And that other year when our father was at war with Red. Red kidnapped you to force our father to give up some territory, but he couldn't part with the money and kept stalling. I was the one who rescued you, remember? That was a close call. We both almost died. You told me to leave you, but I thought, I have to pay you back once." "Oh, I remember now, it was that time, wasn't it? When we were waiting to die, I told you I kinda wanted to open a dessert shop. I don't know why, it just seemed like eating dessert could make people happy." Dylan suddenly pulled me into a hug. "That's all in the past," he said. "We won't have to go through that anymore." Yeah. It was in the past. Felt like a long time ago. I didn't move. When Dylan let me go, I took his right hand and lowered my head. I could see the line on his palm again, but Dylan didn't know. I said, "Even though it was a long time ago, you were never that easy to beat, Dylan. You're not getting old, are you?" Dylan was silent. "Yeah. I can't fight like I used to." But I disagreed. "You're not even 30. Not even 30. Dylan still had a long life ahead of him. I looked at his face, afraid to look too hard, afraid he would notice the focus in my eyes. He asked hesitantly what was wrong. Nothing was wrong. I just wanted to kiss Dylan. I leaned in with some force, knocking over the bottle of liniment. "Dylan," I called him. "Yeah." Dylan. Yeah. I smiled. The strong smell of the liniment filled the air, making my eyes burn. My vision has completely returned. But I haven't told Dylan. I'm still pretending to be blind, wanting to let things stay this way for a while. The summers in the Midwest can be long. As I was drifting through the lingering heat, I suddenly heard a surprised voice. Jack? Jack, it really is you. This is great. Oh my God. I thought I'd never see you again. It was a guy nicknamed Rabbit. He was called that because his skin was pale and he was timid, easily startled like a rabbit. But he was incredibly loyal. I let him run with my crew, and after he made a name for himself, he became Rabbit. Right now, he was acting like one, hopping into the dessert shop. He grabbed my hand and poured out his story. He told me that after my accident, my guys had either joined other bosses or scattered. By some coincidence, he ended up in the Midwest, running a small business. He couldn't believe that in a country this big, we run into each other in this small corner of it. Rabbit was a good friend, someone I trusted completely. It was good to see an old face, but seeing him also made me anxious. I had a feeling, man, I still can't believe Dylan is really gone. And there it was. He was going there. I smiled faintly. All right, Rabbit, it's been a while. Let us not talk about that. But Rabbit was emotional, his eyes turning red. I'm just glad you're okay, Jack. Back then, we all thought you both died at sea. It's a good thing Ronan found me in private and said he found you and wanted to bring you here. He asked if I could help. That's how I knew you were still alive, damn. Jack, you have no idea. I almost cried my eyes out. Rabbit? Just then, Dylan, who had been out grocery shopping, came back. I immediately stood up to greet him. Wow, you got roast goose. I haven't had that in forever. I stopped mid-sentence. Dylan froze for a moment, then asked, you can see? I shut my mouth. In my haste, I had forgotten I was still a blind man. Rabbit cheerfully greeted Dylan. Long time no see, Ronan. Yes, not Ronan. I whipped my head around and stared at him, my gaze dark. Rabbit was startled. He is Ronan. I said word by word, yes, Dylan. Call him Dylan. Rabbit looked uneasily at Dylan, then back at me, and finally said to Dylan with concern, Ronan, what's wrong with Jack? Dylan's dark eyes locked onto me. He took a few steps closer and asked, you can see, can't you? I pressed my lips together. He asked again, and you remember now, don't you? I replied flatly, I don't know what I'm supposed to remember. Suddenly, he held out his right palm in front of me. There was a line running across it, but it wasn't a natural crease. It was a scar. A deep, deep wound was the only thing that could have left such a clear scar. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see it. You must have seen it a long time ago. This isn't a palm line. This isn't my brother's hand. Ronan stated it calmly. He imitated Dylan's tone perfectly. The cadence, the intonation, the lack of inflection, he had it down perfectly. He studied Dylan's way of speaking, mimicked his every move. As long as I could only hear him, as long as I couldn't see, as long as my brain continued to blur the line between scar and crease, he would always be Dylan. The neighbors, the new kid we hired, the regulars who came to the shop, my new friends, all of them called him Dylan. How could he not be Dylan? How could he not? Tears threatened to break through a raw, forceful pressure. I fought against it, my eyes aching. The pain spread like a spiderweb. Ronan's eyes were also filled with tears. He looked at me with sorrow, wearing a face identical to Dylan's. Maybe he thought sadness could bring us to the same side. But what did I have to be sad about? I only hated him. A moment of hate, an eternity of hate. You like to play games, don't you? I grabbed his collar fiercely. You like pretending to be Dylan? Then keep pretending. Just like before. I want to expose you. I didn't want to remember. I'm not a brave person. I'm someone who would rather be confused. If the whole world, including my own brain, told me this person was Dylan, I would believe it. I had to believe it. Okay. After a long time, Ronan suddenly said okay, gently placing his hand over mine. Then we'll keep Dylan alive together. I looked at his face and suddenly lost all my strength. My grip on his collar loosened, and I wrapped my arms around his neck instead. For the first time in my life, I cried my heart out. Dylan died in the vast, open sea. Before he died, our father was in the middle of negotiating a massive arms smuggling deal with a rival named Red. The deal wasn't finished when I put a bullet in his head. Shortly after his death, Dylan took over the family business. Red came to him, wanting to continue the deal, but Dylan flatly refused. Dylan had never wanted to get involved in that kind of thing. Our father had eventually realized that his eldest son was not easy to control. As for his other two sons, one fainted at the sight of blood, and the other, well, that was me. Lazy, careless, and a pervert who liked men. Each was more useless than the last, so he gave up on having us handle that side of the business. Over time, we lost track of what shady deals he was involved in. My revenge led to his sudden death, leaving behind a mountain of unfinished business. Dylan was swamped. Some tried to lure him with profit, others threatened him. He ignored them all. I knew what he wanted. He wouldn't be foolish enough to try and stop them, but he also wasn't greedy enough to join them. Let them go their way and we would go ours. But we were too naive. Those weren't their rules. The family was a crucial link in the chain of profit. If Dylan wanted to take over, he had to be brought into the fold. If he couldn't be brought in, he had to die. We were careful, but we couldn't guard against betrayal from within. One day, a man who had been by Dylan's side for 7 or 8 years was supposedly kidnapped. We went to rescue him only to walk right into a trap. There was no kidnapping. It was just an elaborate setup. For every man of honor, there's another without it. No amount of shared history could compete with cold, hard cash. That night, we were led onto a boat. The whole thing was orchestrated by Red. At first, he dragged it out, wanting to gamble for lives at a card table. Once the boat reached international waters, he planned to eliminate us. But he was the early bird trying to catch the worm, with a mantis waiting behind him. Red was impatient. Someone else had bigger ambitions, wanting to take everything for themselves and kill 2 birds with 1 stone, getting rid of Red in the process. Later, when explosives were found on the boat, chaos erupted. In a desperate fight for survival, everyone scrambled for the few life-saving supplies on board. Gunshots rang out constantly. In the confusion, Dylan and I, who were tied up, were forgotten. We managed to untie each other and weave through a storm of bullets and blood. The sea wind picked up violently. Waves crashed against the hull, sending spray everywhere, and the deck lurched beneath our feet. Crash, 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 boom! The boat exploded. Dylan and I both jumped into the sea to save ourselves. We didn't die. We swam for a while in the bone-chilling water and were lucky enough to grab onto an undamaged life raft. Red had thrown it down, trying to abandon his men and escape alone, but he was shot through the chest by a stray bullet. In the end, after all the fighting, no one made it onto that raft. It was pushed away by the raging sea. After the explosion, a torrential rain began to fall. Dylan and I collapsed onto the raft, exhausted, the rain beating down on us painfully. We were too far from shore. In the vast, empty ocean, with no one to rescue us, we were going to die sooner or later. A black sky, a black sea, a black rain. I felt an unprecedented sense of peace. It wasn't the first time Dylan and I had waited for death together. It seemed no matter how many times we struggled to survive, this would always be the end. If not this time, then the next. We huddled together, enduring, waiting for rescue in the next second, or death. After the storm passed, the sky began to lighten. The dawn was a strange, beautiful crimson, and the sea was as calm as if for the first time since its creation. The tranquility of impending death. My eyelids grew heavy. The beautiful sky above me became a smaller and smaller slit. On the boat, my arm had been hit by a stray bullet. Although I had managed to stop the bleeding, I was in pain. I was tired. I didn't want to live anymore. I could have died a long time ago. My mother has been dead for so long. When she fell at my feet that day, she must have wanted me to join her soon, right? I wasn't a very good son. I kept putting it off again and again. Dylan rested my head on his lap. The shadow he cast over me was like a tiny, tiny cloud on my face. As I was drifting off to sleep, he started talking about the dessert shop I had once mentioned. He said if we survived this, we should leave New York and open one. He was tired of all the fighting. It was pointless. I had never been serious about the dessert shop. It was just something I said, but Dylan took it to heart. He started listing cities, thinking of names for the shop, planning a menu. I smiled and said, forget it. We might as well just die and be reincarnated. Maybe in the next life, I'll be born the son of a dessert shop owner and just inherit the business when I grow up. Dylan said no, the next life would have its own wishes. He also said we might not meet in the next life. Did he want to meet me in the next life? I didn't ask. I don't know when I fell asleep or when I woke up. When I came to, my mouth was filled with a metallic taste that made me want to gag. A warm liquid was flowing into it. I was so thirsty. I instinctively swallowed and sucked until I was fully awake and realized Dylan was feeding me his blood. Was he insane? I pushed his wrist away, a sudden burst of strength surging through me. I sat up and stared at him. He looked terrible, a terrifying shade of bluish white, and I, lost in my own haze, had only just noticed. Why? He should have been in better shape than me. My eyes widened as I saw a patch of red on the hem of his shirt. You're hurt. I lunged at him and saw his back, which he had kept hidden from me. There was a long, gruesome gash. The back of his shirt was soaked in blood that had already dried. When? Who did it? The boat was so chaotic, so chaotic. He hadn't even cried out in pain. For the first time in my life, I felt such terror, such panic, and such rage. I roared, "Are you fucking crazy? You're hurt like this and you're feeding me your fucking blood? You think you're some kind of saint, trying to earn good karma? You wish. You're a gangster. You're destined for hell. I'm not going to be your good deed." Dylan kissed me. His lips were dry and chapped, and the peeling skin stung me. I closed my eyes. I was so dehydrated that only a thin trail of tears escaped. "It's okay," he said. "We're both going to hell. I'll just go first and clear the way for you. I don't need. But that's not something we can decide, Jack." I watched Dylan die bit by bit. I told him not to sleep. I said if he died, I would go kiss Ronan on his grave. He just smiled. He rarely smiled so gently. He said, "Okay, then you have to live until then. Let Ronan keep you company. He actually likes you, you know." I asked, "Does he like me the way you like me?" Dylan didn't answer. He wouldn't say such cruel last words. He knew that every truth uttered by a dying person carried immense power. I said, "It's fine if you don't say it. I don't like you anyway. If you die, I'll forget you in a second, so you'd better not die. Otherwise, you'll really lose out. You slept with me for so long, and in the end, you won't even have a place in my heart. Don't you think that's a raw deal? Don't die, Dylan. Don't die." He died. He closed his eyes peacefully. He closed his eyes without a trace of regret. The sea wind would blow over him. The harsh sun would beat down on him. The seabirds would land on him and peck at him with their long beaks. In the end, I followed his last wish and pushed him into the sea. Maybe leaving him to rot in the sun would have been too unsightly for such a beautiful person. The vast, open sea. Dylan South final resting place. For the rest of my life, I never want to see the ocean again. I hope I never have to remember how he abandoned me in such a vast place. How cruelly he left me forever alone. I had a long, long dream. When I woke up, I stared at the sunlight outside my window for a while before throwing back the covers and getting out of bed. It was an ordinary day. After breakfast, Dylan and I would go to the shop to prepare for the day's business. Lately, we'd been thinking about updating the menu, trying to come up with new twists on traditional desserts. I finished washing up and went into the kitchen. I saw a familiar figure standing at the stove. A soft white shirt, sleeves rolled up to the forearms, tucked neatly into his pants, making his shoulders look broad and his waist narrow. He had his head turned slightly. In the gentle morning light, tiny flecks of gold danced on his long eyelashes. The curve of his forehead, nose, and lips was a beautiful arc, as perfect as the man I had dreamed of in this life and the last. "Dylan." I wrapped my arms around his waist from behind and rested my chin on his shoulder. "What are you making?" He turned off the stove and was about to lift the lid, But instead, he put down the spoon and took my hands, which were resting on his stomach. Shrimp kanji. Didn't you say you hadn't had it in a while? You're such a good husband. I grinned, turned his face toward me, and kissed his lips. It was meant to be a light peck, but he opened his mouth and captured my lower lip, nibbling it gently before suddenly turning around and pinning me against the sink. This is a new day, a new kiss, a new Dylan. I hugged him tightly, closing my eyes, using every sense but sight to feel him. I vaguely remembered a long time ago someone said to Dylan, "Let us play a game." What game?
I've forgotten.
All I know is that from now on, there is only one person in the world with this face, and that person is Dylan. Forever and ever. Only Dylan. Epilogue. Ronan found Jack in a small fishing village by the sea. Everyone thought Dylan and Jack were dead. But, strangely enough, he had a dream one night where Dylan told him to go to a certain place and bring Jack back. Ronan woke up in tears and, without telling anyone, went to that place. He really did find Jack. Jack was in bad shape. Unconscious, a high fever, delirious, always crying. A few times he would briefly open his eyes, but he wasn't fully conscious. He would just insist on touching his hand, confusedly calling him Dylan. He would say, "Dylan, don't sleep." He would say, "Dylan, open your eyes." He would say, "Dylan, didn't we say we were going to leave New York and open a dessert shop? Why are you sleeping? Wake up, wake up. Dylan, Dylan, Dylan." Jack would repeat the name over and over. He would touch his hand, then suddenly his whole body would jolt. "No, this isn't Dylan. Where is Dylan? Tell him to come find me." At first, Ronan didn't understand. Then he remembered. Dylan had a horizontal crease across his right palm. Because he had known about it for as long as he could remember, and it wasn't particularly important, he had almost forgotten about it. Ronan suddenly found it laughable. That game, Jack had probably seen through him from the very beginning. All that time, he was just playing along with them, watching them like a show. All along, Jack was the one who was truly playing the game. Ronan stared at the man on the bed with something close to hatred. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to ask both Jack and Dylan. But that hatred was just a capsule. It slid down his throat, and once it reached his stomach, the hard shell dissolved, releasing a thick bitterness. At this point, could he really live in this world alone? His twin brother was dead. His other half was dead. He needed to fill that void, to become a whole person again. Only Jack. Only Jack. Jack was the proof of Dylan's existence. They had once been so intimately entwined, and his own heart had indeed beaten wildly for him. The next time Jack became agitated and cried because he couldn't find that line, Dylan took a knife and, in the same spot on his own right palm, carved a deep gash. Ronan didn't know how long Jack would be like this. He just wanted to crudely forge a line to soothe the semi-conscious Jack. He never expected that when Jack woke up, he would have forgotten. Forgotten that Dylan was dead. When he touched the wound on his palm, which had now become a scar, he naturally took him for Dylan. Thinking back, maybe it was Jack's own mind suggesting it to him. A scar and a palm line, no matter what, would never feel the same. It was Jack's subconscious that needed a Dylan. Ronan decided to keep up the act. Pretending to be Dylan had once been a meaningless game. Now, it was the only way to keep Dylan alive. It was also a form of mercy for the amnesiac Jack. They left the troubles of New York behind, reborn. It was as if there were only Dylan and Jack left in the world. No Ronan. To every new person he met, Ronan introduced himself, "My name is Dylan." And Jack, oblivious, called him Dylan. When Ronan looked in the mirror without making any of his own expressions, he would touch the face in the reflection and forget that he wasn't Ronan, a privilege no one else in the world had. Whenever he missed Dylan, Dylan would return from the mirror. When Jack repeatedly asked about Ronan, Ronan finally realized he needed to come up with a way to trick him. He carefully scripted several phone conversations. What Dylan would say, what Ronan would say, it was all written down. He recorded Ronan's lines on a cassette tape, leaving pauses for Dylan to speak. He paid a student to dial the number from a payphone and play the recording. He told the student he had a sick family member at home and had to trick him this way. With every call, Ronan was drenched in a cold sweat. He was terrified something would go wrong, that Jack would suddenly grab the phone from him and want to talk to Ronan himself. But luckily, it went smoothly every time. Ronan couldn't quite define his feelings for Jack. When he had willingly pretended to be Dylan to sleep with Jack, he had felt angry on one level, but on another, he had reveled in it. Now that he had to pretend to be Dylan, he seemed to have no desire to be intimate with Jack anymore. His shoulder, like Dylan's, had a scar. It was from when he had shot himself. He remembered the pain, remembered Dylan and Jack at that moment, and finally admitted that he had done something terrible. He refused to repeat the same deception. When Jack finally regained his memory, Ronan felt an unprecedented sense of loss, and also an unprecedented sense of relief. When Jack grabbed his collar and told him to keep playing Dylan, he felt a strange, unprecedented peace. He said okay. For many years after that, he was Dylan. He and Jack, together, were both lucid and deluded. They both knew the truth, and they both never spoke of it. The name Dylan became known to many people. It was as if Dylan had never died. Gradually, the time he spent as Dylan became longer than the time he had spent as Ronan. In his long imitation of Dylan, he could no longer tell who he was. He also couldn't tell if his feelings for Jack came from the Dylan he was imitating, or from his own true heart. Many years later, Ronan was old, on the verge of death. In his last moments, he heard Jack calling him Dylan. He called the name many times until finally, it changed to another, Ronan. For a moment, Ronan didn't know who he was calling. His old, slow mind took a long time to remember. Oh, that was his other name, his original name. In that instant, Ronan felt as if he were waking from a very long dream. The dream had started when he himself proposed a game. The dream was the game. Now the dream was over. He had to step out of it and face the end of his life as his true self. He felt Jack's tears fall on the back of his hand. Was this the ending he wanted? Ronan still couldn't be sure. He had already fallen into a deep sleep.